This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. Through their diverse range of publications, New Society Publishers' books explore topics that are at the forefront of creating positive change in our world. From regenerative agriculture and permaculture to social justice and eco-conscious living, their books cover a wide spectrum of subjects that empower readers to lead more regenerative and fulfilling lives. Now, whether you're a seasoned environmentalist, a curious beginner, or someone simply seeking inspiration and guidance on your journey towards regenerative living, New Society Publishers is here to support you every step of the way. Now, exclusively for listeners of this podcast, you can use the code SKILLS25 and receive a 25% discount on all ebooks at newsociety.com. That's all one word and lowercase, SKILLS25 on all ebooks. So level up your knowledge today at newsociety.com. Hey there everybody and welcome back. So today we're going to continue the mini-series that I'm building on regenerative tourism. This time we're going to take a closer look at the specific context of the country where I live here in Spain. Now, Spain has been a top global tourist destination since the 1960s, and the industry that has grown to meet the demand for travel has shaped so much of the country, especially the Mediterranean coast and cities like Barcelona, Valencia, and towns that have grown up entirely to cater to the specific type of budget tourism of places like Benidorm, Salou, and Lloret del Mar. Yet in recent years, there's been a major backlash from the local population protesting irresponsible development, skyrocketing prices, and exemptions from water restrictions directly related to the way that tourism is managed. Here to explore these challenges as well as the potential to chart a new course for both hosts and visitors is Sonia Teruel. Sonia helps grassroots initiatives, entrepreneurs, and destination management organizations in their transition to a regenerative model of tourism. She's also a consultant, facilitator, and founder at Regen Lab for Travel. In this conversation, we explore the meteoric rise of Spain as a tourist destination and its impact on the communities where visitors concentrate. We look at the challenges that have ignited protests and opposition to the way that tourism is managed, as well as some of the responses to these issues that may cause bigger problems in the long term. From there, we mine Sonia's experiences as a community conversation facilitator who works to guide collaborative processes that explore the potential for new ways of managing visitors and hosts alike in order to achieve lasting solutions. Now, Sonia will be the first to admit that these efforts are still in their infancy, and case studies of real success over time don't exist yet in our region. But she points to some promising projects to keep an eye on and perhaps emulate as they get established. Now, though the focus is on the Spanish context, I have no doubt that there are equivalents to many other places around the world where the tourism industry has shaped development and policy for decades. And I hope that many of you listening will find inspiration for where you live as well. So now I'll hand things over to Sonia Teruel. Welcome, Sonia. It's great to have you here again to have another conversation. I'm really looking forward to exploring this sector of tourism, especially with a focus on Spain, because this has been really important to my own experience recently, living in the province of Barcelona, and many of my other friends who live in different provinces around Spain as well. This has become such a big current issue, which is management of tourism, since this is a very central area, a hotbed for tourism in Europe. But before we get started, how are you doing? How are things for you today?
Thank you, Oliver. I'm happy to be here. I'm okay. I'm actually in Spain at the moment as well. As you know, I'm based in the UK, but I'm now traveling a bit more. So yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you.
And how is it that you got started in working with communities, especially fomenting conversations around the management of tourism and visitorship and hosting for the communities that you work with?
I studied tourism management many years ago. And one of the things that really appealed to me was community-based tourism. And I started working more focusing on communities in Mexico, where I lived for 8 years. And we worked with rural and indigenous communities. And I've always been very attracted to the side of, tourism planning. So what's happening at the destinations that we don't know. So it's not just preparing everything for the visitor, but it's what is happening at the destination before the visitor arrives. And also the responsibility, so if you're working with indigenous rural communities, then you really need to look at, how do we create this vitality, this well-being, and how do we reinforce this, and, their empowerment, etc. How do we get rid of this colonial, viewpoint or ways of doing things? And how do we switch from this hero, perspective to a more, humble perspective? So I was passionate about that. And then it just grew from there, So when I started, I did this from the sustainability point of view or paradigm. And then when I started working with regeneration, it just made so much sense. So I started working with more communities around the world.
And how do you make that distinction from a sustainable to a regenerative paradigm? What are the major distinctions for you?
So sustainable tourism is it's definitely an improvement from conventional tourism. That's for sure. So we are more aware of the harm that we can cause at the destination, and we're still following top-down prescribed solutions. We do it with the best intentions, but generally from, as I said, this heroic perspective, like I know best, I come here to help you. These are the standards that you need to follow, right? Sustainability is also more about minimizing impact, mitigating impact, but we're still focusing on economic growth, unfortunately. I think we're still not very aware of the planetary limits. We're not aware that there is a system that we need to change somehow. So, because it's still putting money at the heart of the decisions, at the heart of the projects, and still using kind of the old paradigm of finding solutions to the problems in a very fragmented way without really looking at the place's real needs and even the place's potential. And the place often becomes secondary. So it's not designed from place. We're still using standardized solutions, tick boxes, offering generic experiences without really looking at what is the talent, the essence, the sense of place that we're in. So regenerative tourism is starting to ask all of these big questions. Like, where are we going with this? Is the system working for us? A system that was created, that met certain needs at a point, but it was a very different time. So it's from the Industrial Revolution, we started doing things in a certain way. And so now we're realizing that with all of these solutions that we're trying to find, with all of this mitigation, we're just really getting nowhere, So regenerative tourism builds the capabilities of the place to regenerate and bring vitality to the whole of the place. So it's more systemic thinking, and it does question the system, and what it does is puts life at the heart of everything. So instead of putting money, it puts life and the life of everyone and everything, life of nature, life of humans at the heart of every design, every decision. And it uses, nature is our teacher, basically. So it uses nature, and nature follows nature's principles so that we start creating these ideal conditions to create life. So by creating synergies, mutual relationships, valuing collective wisdom, diversity, or recycling everything, etc. So we're designing according to the place that where we are, and is not standardized. So it understands the place, the projects within their people as living systems, not machines. So that's the really big difference as well, and considers nested systems as well. So how can we be at the service of the whole, right? So how can tourism be at the service of the place, of the destination, as opposed to tourism is kind of the main thing, the main source of, economic et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So it just changes the view. It changes the role of tourism. And people also take back take their power back. So it puts a lot of value in the essence, the identity, the sense of agency of the people of the place. So it's much more grounded and relationships are much more equal. And so that's like the main characteristics, because usually definitions of regenerative tourism are really long, because obviously they're based on living systems, and living systems are complex. It's more systemic. So, but yeah, it's a completely different viewpoint, and it obviously, and we're not saying that sustainability is completely wrong. I've worked in sustainability for many years, and I mean, the intentions are really, really good, but it just needs more support. It just needs a bigger switch, you know?
Yeah, now I really like some of the concepts here, and this is starting to unfold as we build this into a series from different perspectives on what regenerative tourism could be, what the potential is. And before exploring what your vision for the potential is and how that might look different in different contexts, let's start to paint a picture of the difficulties that we find ourselves in, the reasons for protests and backlash against the tourism as an industry. And let's look at the specific context here in Spain. So I know that a lot of protests had happened around Barcelona and Girona, two big tourism hotspots very close to where I live, both about an hour away. And this has been caused a lot from, well, the commercialization of the tourism industry around these areas. They are beautiful. They've had industry. They've been cultural hubs for many hundreds, in some cases, thousands of years. And they're aesthetically beautiful. And many of the residences, especially in downtowns or specific areas, have been converted into short-term rentals. I know this is part of the backlash in a lot of cases. And
yes.
Yeah, that's even coming into legislation now in a lot of places. My good friend also lives in the Canary Islands, and as a population of locals there, there's been a huge backlash against the seasonal tourist population that comes for a short while, that really pushes prices up, that gentrifies things and makes it unaffordable for people who live there, ultimately changing the feel and the culture of the places that attracted those people in the first place. So that's the sentiment from the protest side. Tell me about, first of all, how it started to get this way. What are the things that have been pushing it into this industry that has really extracted the soul of many of the places that they were attracted to visit in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, you have to think that tourism in Spain began in the 50s and 60s during the Franco regime. And the government recognized the economic potential of attracting these international tourists, especially from Northern Europe. And they were looking for sun and beaches and also affordability. So Spain became famous due to the sea and sun tourism.
Yeah.
And that was just unstoppable after that. It continued growing and growing and growing without really no planning, no carrying capacity, and no experience of what could happen. I mean, you have to think that back then nature was seen as a machine, as natural resources could be used. They were at the human's service, not the other way around. So in the 90s and 2000s, tourism became one of the most important economic sectors in Spain. And Spain became famous for that, sun and sea, and all the areas that fortunately are being more seen nowadays, rural areas, were just completely left aside, So yeah, it's just been, sorry, you were going to ask.
No, so I'm curious if you have an insight into the policies or the ad campaigns or the things that were done that tried to promote this, that helped it to accelerate, because goodness knows the Mediterranean basin in Europe is large, and this has happened to many other places. Have you seen differences or contrasts between the way that this has been handled in Spain specifically compared to other areas of the Mediterranean that has been bolstered by a similar type of tourism?
I would say areas like, Benidorm, Salou. My family lives near Salou, and I've seen these very, very closely.
Can you explain that or describe it for people who are unfamiliar with these two towns?
Yeah, so basically, place wasn't really taken into account at all, the essence, the identity. And they were just building, doing developments without any harmony at all to the place, and they also destroyed quite a lot of the environment. I mean, Salon nowadays is you can't really recognize it. It used to be a beautiful, beautiful area, and now you see all of these, really tall buildings with absolutely no character at all, not in harmony with the rest of the place. And also is also, the culture has been lost completely. The identity has been lost because, you go around Salou and you see a lot of British pubs. And not that I have anything against the British because I live in the UK, but I mean that's the truth. I mean,
Many of these
we
towns just straight up cater to foreigners, and you barely even find remnants of local culture, even language in some cases. The closest one to me is Lloret del Mar in the Costa
yes,
Brava. Yeah.
similar case, tall buildings, British pubs. And yeah, a lot of litter, a lot of conflicts as well, because this is cheap, it's a cheap holiday. There are no rules in place. There's no sort of, yeah, we don't tell the tourists, how they need to behave, or we don't set out rules, and they just, we just let everything happen. And obviously it's terrible for the residents.
Yeah.
It's quite seasonal as well.
That's true.
Seasonal.
Later, many of these towns are absolutely dead outside of the high tourist seasons of the summer and a couple of major holidays like Semana Santa or winter holidays. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's so much dependence on tourism. There's absolutely nothing else.
Yeah.
The other sectors are just, forgotten. The ancestral wisdom is completely forgotten.
And people
So,
who depend on any other form of income other than tourism often cannot afford to live there anymore. And so you don't have any residents populating the actual towns themselves.
yeah, exactly. Most people are from outside because, the residents cannot afford living there anymore. And they don't feel comfortable anymore. That's the
Sure.
thing also. It's like, well, there's nothing here that makes me feel proud,
Mm.
which is very important, and having that sense of belonging. Obviously, the residents are not taken into account at all when this plan, this development is going on. They are mere witnesses of what's happening at their own home, which is really sad because then is when you find this conflict, because the interests of tourism clash completely with the interests of the residents. So yeah, and that's how Spain started to position itself like this, and that's how people know Spain. Obviously, things are changing, fortunately, but it has been like this for many, many years. And so I think when a destination loses the competitive edge, if you want to call it like that, then the only thing they can do is just to keep building things, build a theme park, do a rally, do this, do that, so that it can keep attracting these people and make the holidays so affordable, so cheap, because obviously there's no quality in that destination, it
Right.
just attracts, you know. So people that won't respect, the local culture, etc., etc., which, I have nothing against those visitors. I have to clarify. It's just, I think it's up to us, as a
How we manage
destination,
these spaces.
how to manage it. Yeah.
Let's talk about the toll that it's taking on the environments. You mentioned how development is displacing a lot of the natural areas,
Yeah.
including, destroying some of the cultural heritage, the architectural heritage of these places. But let's talk about the environmental toll of just how extractive and consumptive these installations are. I know the ones that have really been talked about recently are the fact that many resorts and hotels are exempt from restrictions on water in an
Yes.
increasingly water stressed area. And I can point again to the Barcelona area, which is stressed even in non-tourist season, but there's multiple millions of people that descend on that region during the high season, and that's often the driest season of the year too. And many residents really feel a pinch in what they're able to use water for, or if it's even available, to say nothing about how it affects farmers, which is what I'm very connected with. And many of the industries and the facilities that host tourism are somehow exempt from these things, everything from resorts to golf clubs. And I'm sure there are a lot of others that you can mention as well.
Yeah, and that's all due to the over-dependence we have on tourism. We're so afraid of telling tourists, look, you have to, we have to save water. You cannot waste water. We're so afraid of telling tourists this. We are completely at the service of tourism, and that's the problem. We just have to turn things around. I mean, water is one of the things, but how about floods, also due to unplanned building developments and waste management issues, huge waste management issues, pollution, all sorts of things. I mean, all sorts of things. And obviously you can see the landscape is completely altered. So, and the buildings, for example, located at the shore, on the shore, which is terrible, as supposedly is illegal now, but still happening. So, yeah.
There's a lot of reports too that I could point to about how the development of the shoreline, especially along the Mediterranean, has severely impacted the small water cycle that affects rainfall patterns further into the interior as well. So it's not just consuming groundwater and surface water from the land, but it's actually interrupting the actual rainfall patterns of these regions at the same time. It's really
it's crazy, isn't it? We don't even realize that we're doing all of this harm. So
we painted a really grim picture about the impact of tourism up until this point. And like you said earlier, we're not trying to blame any people or demographics for this. This is something that is the effect of collective involvement and decision making over time. Yeah. Paint me a picture about what is possible if we start to make conscious changes and what the process of getting to that point might look like.
So I think one of the main things for me and the work that I'm doing right now as well is to build people's capacity for participation, to take ownership and realize their value, the value of their place, their culture, their wisdom, and realize that they have the wisdom. They don't need anyone else. They don't need external experts that know nothing about the destination. They might need a facilitator, to help them realize this potential, but that's all, right? So it's build also their capacity to see potential, to step away from this problem solution where we get so stuck in solving problems, but we're actually not able to see the potential, of our place. And also to collaborate, because we compete so much, we are so working in silos, the different departments, and we need to learn. And that is a muscle, you need to learn to collaborate, to cooperate, and work towards a common purpose to serve the whole. So that's the change of viewpoint as well, is how do we serve the whole, and how can tourism serve this whole, and be part of the whole ecosystem, which has, as you say, the farming and the water management and all of the different sectors, and it has the art, and it has the education, and it has all sorts of things, in a place. And, we need to understand where we are. We need to understand our history, our essence, our identity, so it's important to go back to that and just basically just recover this pride as well, and this knowledge of our place, our culture, our identity, and then work together towards a future where we can revitalize our place, our destination. And then in terms of what we offer to the visitors, once we've done this is when we are able to create experiences where you create meaningful encounters, deep encounters. It's not just visiting one day and go, but it's how visitors really learn to love the place as they do, and how everything is creating in harmony with our lifestyle, So instead of disrupting our lifestyle, how can it honor, our culture, our place, our lifestyle, and how can tourism as well, so give support to these other systems, So it's basically seeing what is the potential of this place, So we're in this town nested with, within another, whatever province, etc. What is the potential? What can we achieve together, So yeah, with several, dynamics, tools, etc. You can do that, obviously with a lot of patience.
Mhm.
And switching this mindset takes a little bit of time. But there are certain things that people get immediately, and they get so revitalized and so motivated when you start working on the potential and, the particularities of the place, when you remind them about, the history, their essence, etc.
Mm. So I want to get a sense of how you feel about some of the proposals for changes that have come from sources of protest, sources of discontent and anger in the backlash to the things that we described earlier, and how your process and your communication might open up new strategies. So things like bans on short-term rentals. Actually, that's kind of the main one that's been pushed around. I don't know if you've heard of others other than maybe making the resorts and the golf clubs also subject to restrictions on water, which I don't think is at all unreasonable. But maybe you've heard of others that you can throw into the mix and how those contrast with what comes out of your process of communication with members of the communities that receive tourism.
Well, the local government needs to open up to the community. And fortunately, there are cases already, some local authorities that are already opening up to this. For example, I was asked by the tourist authority in Cazorla in Spain, and the people in Cazorla were already kind of, quite fed up with tourism, just to be very clear. Gentrification, prices of housing going up, everything that you're describing right now, basically. And they were just feeling that everything was that's aimed at tourism, and that was created for tourism and not for them. So they were feeling ignored. Even the businesses in town were focused on the tourists and not to them. Prices were going up, etc. So basically, I think the first step is to get them together and listen to them, So what are the things that concern you the most? So get those things out there, and it's really important that you listen to them. And basically, okay, so what is it that we want then, So it's basically, we're starting to change the narrative from what we don't want to what it is that we want, and what potential exists already in the area to make that possible. So, but it's a lot of work with, among different, it's the local communities, the public sectors, the private sector, I'm from different sectors. Even if we're talking about tourism, we have to invite all of the stakeholders. It's really important because everyone has a say and needs to have a say on their future, on the place's future. And so things like short-term rentals. Okay, what kind of solution do we want for this? And what is possible? Because what was really important as well in these conversations and in Cazorla, thinking back to Cazorla, was that when the different members of the public authority, public sector came, they were able to explain what things were harder for them to do and why, and again, you can see the nested systems here, and you can see everything that is involved. Sometimes they say, well, we don't have authority here to do this and to do that, so we need to collaborate with I don't know, diputación, with the different levels, which in Spain can be quite confusing. So, because it's not always the local authority that can make the changes.
True. There's a lot of levels and overlapping jurisdictions that need to be navigated.
Yeah, you know this very well. So
I do.
yeah. So you have to start conversations and see who you need to invite to the conversation, who do we need to invite to this conversation so that we can make substantial changes that need to be done. So it starts from there, and a lot of will to make those changes, and see what can be done. But also, I think it's important, and that I think one of the most important things, I truly believe in this, is that people feel empowered, because it's not all about, we pay tax, this is your job. That's it, because sometimes, when you see, obviously it's not the same everywhere, but when you see some local authorities, tourist offices, and talk to them, some of them, they either don't know better, they don't know how to do it better, they have their hands tied, etc. So sometimes it's not all, doesn't all fall to them, and they just need a bit of support as well. So it's basically creating a team as well and collaborating more with the local community. So we had to tell the local authority as well, like, why don't you count more on the community? There's people here that would be so happy to help, that have great ideas, that could be champions as well. So count on them, don't think that you're alone in this. So it works both ways as well, is how us as a community can create this change.
What are some of the ideas that you've heard in these discussions bounced around that might offer unique context-based solutions for problems that these communities are facing?
So in Cassola, they were talking a lot about traffic, for example, noise pollution, traffic. That was terrible. It's a small town with very narrow roads. And I lived it myself when I was there. It's just difficult you can't go for a walk. It's just, so basically they were just trying to find these solutions that could be something that the local authority did, but also could be, some ideas that they created. So for example, if they made all of the streets pedestrian, or they made the streets, pedestrian at certain hours, what would be the alternative for people that really need to go to their homes? And, sometimes it's not so viable if you have children, etc. So, how about the businesses? How about businesses that need to transport, etc. So it's like the private sector can come in there as well, and be creative and collaborate and create this, some of the proposals were, okay, what kind of transport can be created that we can all use collectively, so things like this. Yeah, in terms of, I don't know, businesses, there's so many things. Also, they were talking about creating a place for the community to get together. And because sometimes that doesn't happen, the community, they don't talk. People don't talk. They talk with the people they know, but how can we have ongoing, meaningful conversations about the things that we all care about, and how can we combine this and do it in a more leisurely environment that doesn't feel too serious? Because sometimes people feel, oh, no, I can't be bothered to do this. This is too much, or I don't know enough, or whatever. But when you create environments that are a bit more fun, you mix it up with, with food or with whatever, with art, with, different initiatives, local initiatives, etc. People start feeling much more comfortable, and then start getting, more united, and they can start having conversations about the things that they care about. So they were
actually
thinking
something, that I really wanted to ask you about that I hadn't considered in the beginning. Like, these are challenges that I've found in a lot of community building exercises, is figuring out ways to get the maximum participation. Because oftentimes if you just put it out there that, hey, let's have a discussion about whatever topic, you're likely to to communicate or to attract the people who feel most strongly about these things and have the strongest opinions, and not necessarily a representation of the community as a whole, right? People who are more shy or timid or are not attracted to those formats of expression have just as valid of opinions and ideas to express, but depending on how you frame it and how the activity is organized or facilitated, you might be potentiating a certain type of voice or a certain type of opinion that is not representative of the whole community. And you mentioned some really good examples there already to increase engagement and to make it a less stressful environment. Maybe some other ideas about making sure that you get a fair representation of attendance to start a conversation.
Well, I think it's all about how you communicate it too.
Yeah.
Because if you're saying, oh, yeah, we have a meeting about deciding about our future, for example, that's like sounds really scary.
It's a certain profile of person who shows up to that.
Yeah, and we also, there's always, yeah, exactly. There's certain people that are going to turn up and it just sounds too much. And we're used to other people making the decisions for us.
Right.
So often it's like, they're not going to, even if I'm interested, they're not going to listen to me. I don't know. I don't want to waste my time doing things like this. So it's more about how you communicate it, and it takes time. And the problem with these projects is that generally they're very short because of, obviously the funds they have, and that's totally understandable. But you do need time to get this, to start talking to people and for them to realize that there is a genuine intention to include them in the conversation and that they have a lot to say, so it's Diane Dredge talks a lot about this, like in the work that she did in Flinders Islands, for example, is how it takes a few years for this to really happen, and sometimes it takes 1 year to go and talk to people about this, to create different spaces, events where you can get together, you can talk about it and make people, more comfortable and realizing that, they have a lot to say and it's important that they say it.
The whole process of building trust, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And what insights or advice can you give on the facilitation process itself for someone who perhaps sees these issues present in their own community or a need to bring people together to make more collective decision making? What advice can you give them on starting the conversation and some tips on facilitating it so that it is productive and, gets to a place of cohesion and collaboration rather than, I don't know, I've definitely seen a few of these where they tend towards arguments and towards kind of a mob mentality, especially if there is a defined enemy in the conversation.
Yes, obviously I learn every day. And that's the most important thing as well, is that you realize that you're also evolving with them. In my experience, it's important, first of all, to be very clear that everyone is welcome and that not only is everyone welcome, but it's very important for you, that they all turn up and come. And obviously, if there's fewer people, sometimes we get really depressed, and people get really depressed if there's just 8 to 10 people turning up because they go, oh, but why, people complain all the time and they don't turn up to these things. It doesn't really matter. I think it doesn't matter if you start small. I think that it's very important to get also the champions, the people that can attract other people afterwards. So yeah, to build trust, to me, is starting slowly. As I said, just create an environment where, that aren't so serious, that can start, getting people together, etc. And in terms of the facilitation, when you get to the working point, it's very important that you give voice to everyone. And I don't say this lightly, because you get the people that are really, really voice their opinions and have certain experiences and don't let other people talk. So it's very important to co-create rules from the beginning, but co-create the rules with everyone and make sure that everyone is going to respect them and make sure that others respect them as well. So it's not just the job of the facilitator, but everyone has to be responsible, for respecting those rules, like letting other people talk, for example. Yeah, that's very important. And then creating an environment where people can feel a bit more relaxed, so it's not just do, it's also feeling, and some people are really afraid of doing that. It's also the feeling is really important, the imaging, the visualizing, what do you have, what do you want? But I feel that what is quite important is to focus on the potential more than the problems, because we're so used to focusing on the problems.
Yeah, it's really easy to complain. It's a lot harder to come up with viable solutions.
Yes, but also is so if we start, obviously you talk about what worries you get that out of the way, obviously, unless there is a big trauma that needs to really be dealt with, But if we're talking about, okay, this is a situation that we don't like, we want to change. Okay, so instead of talking so much about what you don't want, start, switch the conversation to what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you want? I want this, I want that. Okay, let's work from there. And then, as I said, working from what is the potential of this place, and there's many different ways of working with potential, from the systems where you nested within to recreating a moment or, where you are truly vital and happy, etc., and how you can replicate that. There's different ways of working with potential, but it really changes completely the energy and the dynamics of the room.
Yeah.
When you work on potential, and then it has to be completely participatory. So, and self-organized. So I always use methodologies that are self-organized. Otherwise, we don't get out of this view of expert and client, or, So the facilitator needs to be there just to support the process, but it can't be the person proposing that this is what you need to do or giving the solutions. It needs to be them that come up with these answers, So, yeah, that also changes a lot of the dynamics, because then they realize that they can come up with answers, and that all comes from collective wisdom.
Yeah.
So that's some, points I would say. And also is the after that process is how do we keep the momentum, which is big challenge, but it's really important.
So beyond these processes for getting the conversation started, getting the collective wisdom to create, management plans or solutions for a regenerative way of managing tourism, do you believe that ultimately these solutions need to be generated by the host communities? And what level of responsibility do visitors have in order to engage with this and to change the relationship of their visits to conform to the potential and to actually nourish and give back to the places that they are visiting?
Listen, I think the communities, and that's why I feel it's really important that they get their power back, as a manner of speaking, because if they don't feel they can decide, if they don't feel they can, I mean, the word is really empowered. I mean, you might like it less or more, but it's truly having this ownership, of the place, this agency. If you don't have that, it's very difficult to change behaviors of your visitors. So when you have that, is how do you communicate what you're offering to the visitors? So if you have a tourist project, you want to create certain experiences, And then you make it very clear what kind of visitors you're welcoming, you know, and what is it they're gonna, what can they expect? So obviously they're gonna have a wonderful experience because they're gonna find a place where people thrive, people are genuine, they're gonna really know the essence of the place, but they're gonna be very clear that they have to go in more from a humble, you know, perspective, So if we, as we are saying, regenerative tourism is leaving the places better than you found them, right? So this is like the most common thing you hear, which is not 100% wrong, but is wrong if you leave the responsibility all to the visitors. Because at the end of the day, this has to come from the place, from the destination. So
sure, this is also assuming that they have an idea or that they know what leaving a place better is without having been there before or without having engaged with the place itself.
Exactly. And what happens often with this is like, oh, okay, so I'll help plant a couple of trees and definitely I left the place better, things like this. And it's like, yeah, but is it the right tree to start with?
Sure, yeah. That is a good example.
Yes. Or going to a beach to clean it. Of course, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful if they can help out with that. But that's really short-sighted. I mean, you have to look at the system. And yeah, I think the best way is to really communicate what you want, what kind of visitors you want, what kind of experiences they're gonna get. And when you, through stories, also when you communicate better what this place has to offer, for sure you're gonna attract the right kind of visitors. And I say the right kind is the visitors that you want, which are visitors that truly respect the place, your culture, etc. And they're gonna, for example, you're gonna say, you're gonna live this kind of experience. It's gonna be slow paced, and you're gonna, I don't know, maybe stay at some host's place, which happens in different countries, But also, I think many years ago, what we did in Mexico was to send some tips for the responsible traveler. But I think this is good, but I think what worked best was to actually talk to the visitor, talk to the traveler and explain, what they're going to find and what kind of behavior they're expected to have. And you said you're ours.
I would love to get some more ideas about this because right now there seems to be two ideas floating around, and the one we're talking about now is curating an experience to incentivize a certain type of behavior and a certain type of visitor, which is a process in itself, first of all, to define, and then second of all, I haven't heard, except for a couple of ideas you generated there, what that looks like aside from having conversations. It's not feasible sometimes to have conversations with the volume of people who are coming, some of whom have booked certain types of accommodations or experiences that are already in conflict to a type of visit or engagement that you're trying to disincentivize, right? So maybe some other ideas that are more feasible on a larger scale than speaking with each individual and talking. You mentioned putting out signs and messaging out there. I've definitely started to see this in Barcelona, especially around a responsible use of water. That's one that I really started to see pop up in hotels and even on street signs. But what does it look like from a host perspective to curate an environment that incentivizes the type of visitor engagement that you would like to have when there is already so much infrastructure that incentivizes the opposite?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think that's why the work from the community needs to come first, because we need to be coherent with what we're offering.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm saying, oh, this is the kind of visitor I want, and this is how you need to behave, and then on the other hand, I have my neighbor saying, yeah, come and I'll take you on my quad, whatever, I'm going through the forest and whatever. So that makes no sense. It's completely incoherent.
Or the bars that just sell tons of cheap beer and nightclubs with
yes,
with drink specials and such.
yeah, so some tough decisions need to be taken if we
Yeah.
want a different kind of visit. I mean, that's for sure, you
Yeah.
know. So if we want to change how people view our destination, I mean, if I imagine Salou wanting to make that change, that would be really hard because the way the infrastructure is placed already, etc. So it's slowly, gradually, I think is trying to change, to shift all of this and really, getting this common purpose on, okay, what is it that we want as a collective?
Yeah.
And then, is the message. So for example, if you're a local authority, your tourism authority, destination management, etc., they go to a tourism fair, obviously they have to give the right message,
Hmm.
so they need to be the first ones that champion this.
Yeah.
They need to be agreeing with this. It's the message that you put out there. Obviously, there's the signs, the local signs, etc. But I think to me it's very important that before people travel to your destination, they are clear about what kind of destination this is, what kind of behavior am I expected to have. And that can be done with different messages. If they make a booking through, I don't know, a platform, the message needs to be there.
Yeah.
So if you do it through a travel agency, the message needs to be there, etc. You could send them, some kind of policies before they arrive at the destination. That these are just examples, but
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not just all about rules. It's not all about things that you can't do.
Yeah.
Some things could be fun, could be
Creating
motivational for
alternatives.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like if you find this, which is better for us, more attractive, then it's a win-win,
Yeah.
you know?
I actually do have a new example of that from a town not far from me, and actually is very similar to the context that I have in my small pueblo. It's an area that has this really beautiful stretch of river, which has these pools in it that fall through the rocks and are perfect for swimming. And apparently, right around COVID time, when everybody was looking for alternatives because everywhere else was closed and there were severe travel restrictions, this place really blew up in popularity. And it started to attract mostly domestic tourism, people from inside, but this was like, the free park where there's no regulations and nobody watching you. And it became a real problem, not only for the residents, because people would park in their driveways and all along the streets. The infrastructure was not set up to receive that influx, but also on the environment. People go swimming often with sunscreen, which can really damage water quality, or will bring their pets, which can chase away wildlife and cause impacts in and of itself. I mean, I even heard stories of people bringing, tables and loudspeakers and really treating it, yeah, like an outdoor space.
Not
And
surprised.
so we were given an example of how they've started to manage this in the previous years, because of course there was a lot of dissent from the people who live there, saying that, this was always a quiet place. This really has lost its tranquility. It's really hurting the environment. How can we manage this? And they started to work with, they didn't really have a tourism board because this is not that big of a town, and it was never really considered a tourist hotspot before. They didn't have those types of resources. And so they started to charge for people to go there, which got rid of some of the freeloaders. And then they would also put quotas for any given time. So only a certain amount of visitors at any given time to not overwhelm the system. And obviously there's certain things that you can't bring that could damage it. And setting up designated parking in further away places so that it wouldn't disrupt the residents themselves. And they got to a point where when people would call in at the ayuntamiento, they wouldn't actually tell this as an option for where to go in town. They would offer a lot of alternatives to just reduce the influx to this one place, and took down and I guess removed pictures and mentions of it in a lot of places so that it just wasn't so visible and it wasn't a point of influx. And whether or not this is going to work in the long term, but it does seem to have a positive impact right now. That's
There
just
you go.
one of very few ideas that I have heard, especially near to me, of how people are managing this in different ways to make it sustainable. And I wouldn't say this goes as far as regenerative yet, but it is one way, instead of putting complete bans on something and making a bunch of rules and enforcement, offering alternatives and creating management schemes that could make it something that is, I guess, better than the alternative, right?
There you go. Yeah, you've got a great example there. Yeah, I feel that if you offer something that is really attractive and they know they're going to get a great experience, they'll go for that
Hmm.
for sure. So, yeah, there's different ways of doing it. Obviously, it's complex. It's not just doing one thing,
Of
as you
course.
say, there's different strategies.
And I'm sure this
So,
will evolve for that town as things mature and go along too. But as we have talked about in the past, these concepts and the potential for regenerative visitor or tourism management is still extremely young, to the point where we don't
mhm.
have a lot of case studies that we can point to say that this has worked over a long period of time and has evolved and matured in this way. Many of these initiatives are just at the beginning. But can you tell me about some that you are keeping an eye on that have potential and that give you inspiration in the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, apart from destinations, which is a lot of work that I've been doing in Spain, well, we're actually working on one at the moment that I'm very excited about because it's an open museum, archaeological museum, and they're only getting started, and it's a beautiful initiative, and they truly, truly want the community involved. So it's a great opportunity for people to not just to have their say, but participate actively in the project and then be creative and see what that takes them, and see what's the biggest system and how they can serve this system, create a role for the project, So what can it do apart from, offering archaeological information experiences, etc. But it can be done. Something much bigger can be created, So, but that's just in its starting point. In terms of experiences, I've seen a few. Well, there's actually again at destination level. I don't know if you've seen the events called Regenera. There was one the first one was in Santander, and the second one was in Lanzarote last year, and that was beautiful. I mean, in Lanzarote, obviously, tourism had a more important role. There were more than 800 participants. It was pretty amazing. They organized, in-person and online webinars, workshops, discussion panels, etc. And people, local community, entrepreneurs, private, public organizations got together to talk about what they wanted for their future. And this is being replicated in different places. They're going to do the next one in Valencia, which is so needed,
Mm.
So I can see this growing a lot in Spain. And in terms of specifically tourism, businesses, experiences, I can see a lot coming from the farming sector, which is
Indeed. Our land
gr-
managers, yeah, primarily.
yeah, which is great. Agritourism. There's one example that I've worked with is Agroturismo Maricruz, Agroturismo Maricruz in Navarra. In Navarra, they already have this really nice sustainable mindset anyway. But they have done a beautiful job with this project called Huella Positiva. They wanted to learn more about regenerative tourism, so they invited me to, basically go through all of these, the principles, talk to the rest of the, entrepreneurs community about, what regenerative tourism meant.
Hmm.
And they have really done a great job uniting, like creating these collaborations, uniting all of these residents. And in their own business, they have a little small farm with some animals there, and they have their little garden. And when people go there, they truly experience, it's more like spending a day with them, basically, seeing how they live, learning about the garden, learning about food, nutrition. And they've created this product, if we want to call it like that, called Eco Retos, so eco challenges.
Hmm.
So, and they're educational as well. So one of them was like zero waste, in the kitchen. So the visitors that go there spend time with them in the kitchen, and they learn how to, avoid this waste, or how to manage it, and how to recycle everything, how to reuse things, etc. Now also they teach you how to create your own garden, So it's learning experience as well as creating very meaningful encounter and creating a friendship. So that's a beautiful project. There's another one in Murcia called El Huertanico. You probably heard of them. And this was created in an educational and gastronomic project called the Garden of the Senses.
Nice.
They've created this beautiful project as well to preserve, to educate, promote the biodiversity and the agricultural heritage in Murcia, the traditional agriculture in Murcia. So there's lots of beautiful initiatives like this. Many of them don't call themselves regenerative. That's also why we're finding hard to find case studies, because some of them, I don't know, they just, some of them because they feel insecure, it's like the greenwashing, I think it's called. Yeah. So instead of the greenwashing, is the greenwashing. They don't tell what they do because, they don't want to be in the spot sometimes.
Sure. And sometimes it's opening yourself up to a lot of critique when you're at the beginning stages of a project and haven't matured or been able to show things yet. People will blame you for greenwashing when you just haven't had time to get established.
Yeah, exactly. And I can understand that. I can get that.
Absolutely.
But then at the same time, it's important that you talk about what you do because it's inspirational for the rest.
Indeed.
So, but yeah, there's lots of beautiful things now because of the pueblos vaciados, the rural areas that are empty in Spain. And there's, more and more projects going on that they want to recover this ancestral, wisdom and so oficios and things like this. So yeah, there's a lot going on in Spain at the moment.
There's a real need for it because of all of the problems that we mentioned at the beginning. But that's the other side of it, right? It's bringing a lot of people who see potential, like you mentioned as well, and are launching these initiatives that have a ton of potential. And it's really exciting to see them get established and hopefully to watch them grow as they find success in these little initiatives at the beginning.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So, Sonia, before we wrap up, can you tell our listeners if they are interested in starting to get their communities together, need advice on facilitation, or are looking to you to get some assistance, how they can get in touch and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. They can check my website, is theregenlab.com, or they can email me, sonia@theregenlab.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well as Sonia Teruel or The Regen Lab, once again, for travel. So yeah, I'm easily reachable, I think.
Marvelous. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today and shedding light on the incredible possibilities of transforming an industry that is currently quite extractive into one that really redefines place and identity for the hosts and opens up a world of possibilities for engagement and higher quality experiences for those who travel. I'm really excited to continue to keep an eye on these projects that you mentioned here in Spain and maybe even play a role in participation at some point as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about these very important subjects, and congratulations for your work as well, Oliver.
Thank you so much. Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account @regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.